Everything good? So go ahead. All right. All right. Thank you for picking this session to attend. This is probably actually one of my favorite ones to talk about, because when I meet with my customers and they wrap their head around what I'm going to show you, their day two automation and stuff just kind of takes off. So what we're gonna do is show you how you can take inputs from your custom forms and stuff and make them variables in your scripts. So here's a little bit about me, and I do blog about this. So there's my blog address, or if you want to follow me on X, I do post when I make new blogs, and I have a QR code there. So if you watched the general session this morning, there was some announcements, with operations and automation and stuff. It's really going to be called VMware Cloud Foundation Automation now. So the Aria name is going to be going away. So when you see stuff in the script, if you don't see Aria anymore, or in my slides, if you don't see Aria, that's why. So yeah, so what I want to show you is how you can take, inputs from templates or like day two workflows and make them variables in scripts. And once you understand that, your automation is really unlimited. So if you've never seen the catalog before, so this is a VCF automation catalog. So, it can be building VMs, day two automation, whatever you want to allow your users to do. And when you click on those catalog items, like this is the catalog, the custom form, and these are all inputs. So anything that you want to ask the question to do your automation, you make that as an input that you can then pass on to a workflow script. So when you take that input, like what I showed you there, and I'm doing PowerShell in my example. So if you have a PowerShell host, if you look here in my code, where all those inputs are going to be then turned into variables down in your script that you can then basically do what, like I said, anything when you're writing scripts. So that's the agenda. So yeah, then to add like I said, I was using a PowerShell host. So in the inventory of your orchestrator, you will see the PowerShell host. So you do need to do that for what I was doing. So yeah, so by being able, that was kind of like, just to summarize things, to be able to take those inputs, pass them to your scripts as variables. So if you can script it, you can automate it. So whether it's working with load balancers or anything, storage arrays, even working with stuff that's not VMware related. I've done some automation like creating Microsoft 365 Teams sites or whatever. And we'll get into that. So basically, once you wrap your head around that, your thought process then and what you want to script is really your most powerful tool. So if we're doing day two, that's going to come from workflows. And if you're doing new VM builds, your inputs and your properties are going to come from the YAML code in the templates. So yeah, so here's two examples again. So on the left, I'm showing a server build. So every question that is on that custom form can be passed to a script. And then like here's the example of doing a snapshot, same thing. Any question that you ask can be passed to a script as a variable. So here's the YAML code on a template. So if you look at the YAML code, under properties, you see all these inputs. input VM name, build time, folders, customization spec, IP. When you gather that information, that's what when you then create, and it's going to be on the next slide, when you create a subscription, and when your build is done, it takes all these values and passes it on to whatever you want to run next, whether it's an ABX action or a workflow. So if you're going to do a subscription with an ABX, so here's the subscriptions, and I'm saying, in my example, what I'm doing is when you're doing the build, I wanted to send an alert to like a team channel or something. So that would be pre-compute. So I have a subscription that takes all those values so that when the user is going to do a build or whatever they're going to do, it sends that to the chat right away. So here in the subscription, you can see I gave it a name. You can enable it. The compute allocation is pre, and then you can also say only do that on a condition that your blueprint has, every blueprint has an ID, so I'm filtering it on a certain ID, and then you can see that the action that I'm going to run is going to do a Teams alert. So there you can kind of see the details of doing a subscription. And then to create the actions, if you go under extensibility, under assembler, go to actions and create a new action. So here's that action. So if you look at the code, so when the template sends that through the subscription to your action in your PowerShell, I'm using PowerShell as an example. You can see where it says inputs custom properties, and in that YAML code where you've seen properties, and then I dot image, dot flavor, dot folder name, dot IP. So you can take all that information and bring it over to your script. And then once you get past this part here, I don't care what you do below that. I'm sending that to Teams to do a Teams alert. You could send that to anything. So if you want to, like I said, work with load balancers or any product, Microsoft's 365 or whatever. So once you define that and it grabs that, script whatever you want, I guess and that's what I'm saying is once you wrap your head around this and say, all right, I'm taking these values, I'm passing them to the action, define the variables, and then with PowerShell, once you have that value, you can script whatever. So to do a workflow, excuse me a second. To do a workflow is very similar. So if you go and you create a new workflow, and this is the workflows or an orchestrator. So the one thing you need to do with a workflow then under your inputs and your outputs is you need to add a new input that's going to take the properties. So you define the type as properties, and then I name it input properties. And then what that does, so yeah, you need to add that. And then on the schema can be it's just a very simple schema. All I did was pull over a scriptable task and put that on the schema. And if you look at the code, let me zoom in there. Just like in the ABX action, I'm saying, all right, the input properties is what I named that on like two previous screens. And then whatever the property name was that you had in your YAML code. So where I was doing flavor, folder name, IP, and then once you define those variables in PowerShell and then what I like to do for troubleshooting is to actually write that, and what that does is it puts it into the log. From that point down, there again, you can do whatever. I'm sending that, and I'll show you some screenshots to a Teams channel, but it could go to a Slack channel. Your information could go to anything. So there you can kind of see in the sample flow, Yeah. You know, the difference is ABX actions and workflows are slightly different. You know, we're here where I have inputs, input properties, and then custom properties, and then the flavor. So you do have one extra little step there, but once you define those, then you have your variables that you can really automate anything. So if you want to see what custom properties are kind of sent, when you do a build and you look at your deployments, if you pick on your VM, go to custom properties, you can see all the names that are an option that can get passed over. And this is all controlled by the YAML code that we started with at the very beginning. So then for day 2 automation, those are actually a little easier because when you're doing the VM builds, you had to do your YAML code and your subscription, which would run a workflow or an ABX action. If you're doing day 2 automation, you just create a workflow and it all stays within Orchestrator. So let's go through and create a new workflow. And what I do is just, like I said, it's just one scriptable task that I put on my schema. And then if you look at the code, you know, where it says, you know, inputs, where previous it said inputs, you know, input properties, custom now all you got to do is say inputs, and then whatever name you called that within your workflow. So where I had, you know, like I'm doing a snapshot, the inputs was snap name, snap description, and then you define those variables just like before, and I usually write host so I can kind of see that in the log. And then from that point forward, you know, I'm sending that information, like I said, to a Teams chat, but it could go to anything that you can script. It's a little bit bigger for you to see. And then when you run a workflow, if you want to kind of see the same thing under inputs, after you have a successful one that you run, if you go, you can kind of see there's my inputs that are available to use, and then the values and what they were a string. So that's where the inputs.variable name is, and that's what these, you know, under name, that is your variable names that you would put into your script. And then there, you know, there's some examples. You know, when I was doing a build, I would put that into a, this one is a Slack chat, and I think that one's a Teams, but it could go to anything you want. So all those variable names and stuff you can kind of put into a nice message to your team. And the same thing there. Like if you're doing a snapshot, to let people know what you're doing with automation, you could actually send that to a channel and say, hey, I took a snapshot, here's the VM name, snap name, description, and all the information that's displayed there came from those inputs. So you're just going from an input to the variable that you're going to run the script to do something. And that something can be whatever you want. I hope that makes sense when I say that. So when I meet with my customers and try to explain this to them, they're always like, hey, before I got hired by VMware, I was a customer and I worked with Aria Automation every day. It's like, well, what did you do with automation to use that process? And so I sat down one day, so, you know, like builds, info blocks, to talk to info blocks, to get IPs. One that kind of gets people's attention is the data center flip. So we had, I worked in healthcare, and we had 2 data centers, and we had an orchestrator workflow that would run, and we had stretch clusters. So I would ask all the questions in the custom form that say, all right, you know, which data center is going to be the failover, and, you know, just a couple questions, and they would hit submit, and it would take those values to a script, It would talk to the storage array, because you can talk to anything. It would flip which one was the main storage array and which one was now going to be the backup. And then it would go into vCenter, and it would go into all the rules that you have where VMs should run, where your run rules are, and it would flip it to say that, hey, these VMs should now run on the host at the second data center, and all much the vMotions would just start taking off, and we could do a complete vCenter flip by there was moving pieces, and it was all scripted, but all the values on what to do came from a custom form that got passed over. So if you think about that, you can do stuff with ServiceNow, Veeam backups that I was doing. One of the very first things I ever did, we had NetApp for doing file shares. And it's like, all right, what's the share name? Who's going to have the permission? Those are all questions we would ask. I would send that over to a PowerShell script, connect to the NetApp array, and create those shares. What else do we do here? Active Directory, same thing. You're taking those values from your custom form. Load balancers. We did a big migration from NetApp shares to do Microsoft 365 with OneDrive. And even that team that was in charge of Microsoft 365 didn't have a way to really automate it. So we created a custom form in Aria Automation. Would say, what's the team name? Who are the users? A couple little questions, and it would connect to Microsoft and create the team and move everything over. Lots of stuff. So basically, my last line here is basically, if you can write a script, you can automate it with VCF Automation. And if you write that script and you can run it even without your custom form, make sure it works. And then Aria Automation custom forms just makes it very user-friendly for your users. And then you can, on the custom form, you can put in like red-jetted type stuff that says, hey, it needs to be an IP number, so make sure it is. Or if it's a email address, make sure that things are formatted right. Or if you're asking for, what size, can the drives be? If you're adding drives or something, you can put limits to say, hey, don't go over 100 gig or whatever your environment rules are. So this, what I would recommend you do is, start with something simple. Take an easy process that maybe you get a lot of ServiceNow tickets on, that it could be a very simple script, front end it with a nice little form, and let your users go in and do that automation. Something, I think the things that my customers start with the most is snapshots, to be able to go in and create this day two automation that even the app owners can go in and do their own snapshots. And then when we did that, I had a script that would run that we just made a rule that said, hey, you can automate your snaps, but in 3 days, they're going to get automatically deleted. They're not going to hang around or anything like that. And then, I was showing PowerShell, if you're more comfortable doing Python or something else, to take those values from your custom forms and pass it on to Python or anything like that, it works the same way. And that's why I always say, there's 100 ways to do that. But as long as you're asking those questions on your custom form, which is your inputs, and making them variables in a script of your choice, you can basically automate anything at that point. So yeah, here's some good blog sites. We all pretty well blog about anything that's Aria related, which is now VCF, automation and operations. I'd say if you want to play around with it, don't forget about hands-on labs. Local VMUGs, sometimes they'll talk about this. I go to my local VMUG and give demonstrations. And they did record these sessions, and I did one yesterday on Fusion and Workstation that kind of shows you how you could use that to kind of start your automation journey. So if you don't have your own little dev environment of something to use, don't be afraid to look at Fusion and Workstation. And when you use the APIs and stuff with that, you can do some amazing automation even with those products. So, any questions? Yeah.
Like you said, it's great. Stuff already. Other questions that I have you came back and I was waiting to hear. Validated to make sure that it's everything right.
Right. Yep.
How do you handle issues when it errors out when you're scripting in the back end? So when something doesn't work right, what do you have it send something off?
When I write automation scripts, within your code, let's say like something that maybe people don't always like creating a Microsoft Teams site. So when I write my code and I'll ask all the questions, I'll connect to Microsoft's Azure or Microsoft Office, 365, and then I make sure that connection works. So I have some code in my script that says, all right, I connected. Did I connect? And if I didn't connect, I'll grab that and maybe send an email off to the user that submitted it. So if it comes through, it'll say, hey, I made it this far, and you can keep track. Or lots of times in my scripts, I'll even do a log. So every step that you're doing, verify that what you're connecting to happened. So instead of just writing your scripts in a way that says, just go do this, and I assume that it's going to work, put a log, kind of capture that. And then in that email, I would even take that log and send it along with the email.
A lot of times when it errors out, it might not be in a place that's convenient for them. It might be erroring out in something else. So then we have to go back to Orchestrator. Well, it's all right. From that perspective, but we don't know that it failed because the end users don't really know. They see it run, they see it go, and then they go.
And that's where I always followed that up with. It's not really built into the product, but by sending the messages. Whether you send that message to a team chat or by email or whatever, however you want to do it. You should.
Build an email message, drop it back to the script, set those variables for an email, then send the email out. Add in a read on input even, and you can then have a user interaction where you can say, hey, I've looked at this, maybe I actually fixed it, or try again,
Yeah, you build all that logic into your script. Yeah, and if it's a workflow that completely failed, you could even probably write some code in your script to say, all right, go delete that deployment or something.
On a completely different topic.
Hey, anybody that asks a question, you get a token and you can get a shirt over at the booth. So
in building out your custom form things,
yeah,
I really love the value picker.
Oh, yes.
The value picker doesn't have support for if the input is from the orchestrator. If I created actions in Orchestrator to do an API command to get live data back for the user to actually choose from, it doesn't allow me to do that. I wonder if you're aware of the value tag you're getting any updates or improvements.
I do exactly what you're talking about, where I write an action that goes and talks to something and pulls values back. I usually do that as a drop down. So you like.
Yeah, but when I'm dealing with 100, I mean, it's a bit much to have the user to scroll through 100 results. Whereas if they could just type in 3 letters and it then shows the page that matches these 3 results, that's way easier on the user to find what they want, right?
I was gonna say, you can, with the drop down, you can start typing and it'll start filtering things for you. there's my contact information. If you want to reach out to me afterwards, I have a lab area. I can always test some things. Yeah. So yeah, like I said, when you wrap your head around this process where you can take those inputs and make it a variable in a script, there isn't anything you can't automate. That's what I want, hopefully, people to walk away with, is that basically you can automate anything with Orchestrator at that point, as long as you can write a script. So yeah, there was a question. Yeah.
Just two questions. So my first one is, for my script, why would I put it as an ABX action versus a PRO? How is not that ABX has I would put it in the PRO with the
An action is limited to 15 minutes. So if you would have a long running script, you wouldn't want to use an ABX action. Workflows can run much longer. It comes down to personal preference sometimes, you can do the same thing with an action that you can do with the workflow. Yeah? Okay, yeah, five minutes. But yeah, sometimes I'd look at both, running time, stuff like that. Any other questions? We can take it off to the side. Thank you. Hopefully this helps.